fraction is a division between two quantities. That's it. Pretty simple, huh? Yeah, believe it or not, fractions are simple. Now, the key to understanding fractions is perspective. How you perceive fractions makes all the difference. You say, well, what do you mean? Well, we need to understand what we mean by what's the whole part versus the fractional part. For our first example, let's look at a loaf of bread. Let's make this the whole part. So a slice is considered a fractional part. It's a part, it's a smaller part, it's a subdivision of a whole. But see, now we can change the perspective. Say, well, I want to make this the whole part. I have one whole slice of bread. And what is this? Well, the whole loaf would now be considered, let's say, 24 slices or 30 slices, depending how many slices I divide this into. So you can have 24 whole slices of bread. So notice the perspective, how we change things. We have a whole loaf, it's a small part, a mere portion of a loaf. I make this one entire slice of bread, this is lots of slices of bread. Perspective. Of course, pizza is a terrific example of whole parts versus fractional parts. Here's an example of an entire whole pizza. Looks pretty yummy. Now we slice this thing up into the standard way of dividing up a pizza, into eighths. Each of these individual slices is a fractional part of a whole. Now again, we can change the perspective. So, well, what if we just say one slice is the whole part? I have one whole slice of pizza. Well, then what is this? Well, this would be considered 8 slices. So beforehand it was one whole pizza, 1/8 of a pizza. Here's one whole slice, 8 slices. All based on perspective. I got milk. No, just kidding. Here's another example. If we have one whole gallon of milk, what would this be? I'll give you a hint. I need 1, 2, 3, 4 of these to make one of these. Each one of these is a fractional part of an entire gallon. So this is 1/4 of a gallon. In fact, you pretty much know what this is. This is a quart. Quart, quarter. That's where the name comes from. It's all based on perspective. Now, let's say that one of these quarters, is not really a quarter, but it's a quart, is one whole bottle of milk. This is one whole. So it's one of these guys. Now, what would this be represented by? Well, then this is going to be 4 quarts. One whole quart, 4 quarts. Now, how about something like this? Is this half full or half empty? I don't know. I'm not a psychologist. Where's that bread? For our final example on whole parts versus fractional parts, what's this? Oh, it's the whole enchilada. Good stuff. I love fractions. The denominator of a fraction is the number of slices or fractional parts the whole part is divided by. A loaf of bread is typically divided into 24 parts, so my denominator is 24. A pizza is typically divided into 8 equal parts, so 8 is your denominator. The numerator of a fraction is the actual number of slices or fractional parts taken or being compared with the whole part. If I use 2 slices to maybe make a sandwich, well, then I've used 2 out of 24 slices. My numerator is 2. If I've eaten 3 out of the total 8 slices, 3 is my numerator. Now, there are many ways to express mathematically the relationship between the numerator, the fractional parts, to the denominator, the whole part. Let's look at a few. A common fraction is a fraction expressed as a division of 2 whole numbers separated by a fraction bar. The bar may be horizontal or slanted. By the way, common fractions are also called simple fractions or vulgar fractions. Numbers above the fraction bar or to the left are the numerators. Numbers below the fraction bar or to the right, in these 2 cases, are the denominators. Now going to our examples, here's 2 slices of bread out of 24 total slices. They can be represented in a number of ways. Our pizza example is 3 slices out of a total of 8 slices. 3/8. 3/8, and there's our 3/8 again. Now again, any one of these are typical ways of expressing a common fraction. My favorite is this one, the horizontal fraction bar. Why? Well, it's less ambiguous. It's very clear. When you have actually more complicated expressions, like we have some algebra, if you use a slanted fraction bar, you may not understand or see where one of them begins, where the other one ends, or is there a fraction combined with something else that's not a fraction? Is it really on top or the bottom? It's hard to tell. Here it's very clear. But again, these have their purposes too. If you want to compact something nicely, these are good forms. Or if you have to actually write in one single line, like you're typing something out, then this last form is very useful. So they're all good, but I prefer this one the best, the horizontal fraction bar. A unit fraction is a fraction that has a 1 as its numerator. Let's look at some examples of unit fractions. We'll do the numbers, and also I'll give you a graphical representation. The shaded part would be the actual unit fraction value. So if we're given 1/2, here's what it would look like in a graph, for example. 1/3 would look like this, for example. 1/4 or quarter would have a couple of examples like this. And finally, 1/6 can be represented like this. There's nothing special about slices with exactly straight cuts like you can see over here with these figures. For example, here's a circle that's been cut in half with a very curvy shape, and 1/2 would be represented like this. But just avoid doing that. Let's just keep things simple. I want you to be aware that fractions don't always mean a subdivision of one entire item. It could be, let's say, for example, if you have 12 eggs in a dozen, and you want to have, let's say, want to select these 4, you have 4 out of 12. That's a fraction right there. So it's not always just smaller part. It could be 4 from a larger collection of items. For our first video exercise, let's say this little cube right here, I don't know if you can see that, represents 1 whole cube. And this is 1,000 cubes. So what would this officially represent? What's the fractional part of this compared to this? If this is the whole, what's this? I want you to write it down. Well, the answer is just, 1,000 cubes. Now let's change things around. Let's switch it here. Let's say this big cube is 1 whole cube. And remember, 1,000 of these little cubes fit in here. So if this is the whole part, I want you to take a moment to write down what's the fractional part that this 1 cube represents. Well, the answer is this is 1,000th because it takes 1,000 of these to make one of these. So one of these is 1,000th of one whole cube. If this represents one whole dollar, then what does this here represent? Well, it's just a quarter, or 1/4. Now let's switch things around. Let's say this represents the whole part. This is one whole penny, 1 cent. Then what does this represent right here? Well, this is just 100 cents. That is the fractional part. Now let's do some fractions of time. So let's assume that given the hour hand right here, what would now represent half an hour? I want you to draw the minute hand on the first clock now. Well, it's very easy. All you need to do is move your minute hand right here, and there's half an hour. What would a quarter of an hour be represented by? Well, that will be just very easily done by putting your minute hand right there. Now this one's a little bit tougher. How will you represent 1/3 of an hour? Where would the minute hand be placed? Well, to answer that, 1/3 of an hour is 20 minutes. So the 20-minute mark would be right here. For this next example, notice how between 0 and 1, my number line is being divided into 3 parts. I would like you to shade in 2/3. Now the way I want you to do that is either to go ahead and pretend I'm shading something like this. I can just shade like this with a pen or pencil. That's not the answer, but I'm just showing you. Or you can do something like in a block like this. Something like, again, that's not the answer. I'm just showing you on your paper. I want you to do either something like a block, or block it in like this, or color it in, or just shade it something like this. That represents 2/3. Give it a try. I'm going to use blocks. So if you're going to represent 2/3 on here, I have 1/3 and 2/3. I'm going to block this part in like so. Is my answer. I have 2 out of the 3/3 blocked to shade it in. Now this one I'm not going to give you any help. You give it a number line between 0 and 1, and I'd like you to shade in 3/5. Now for the answer, I'm going to start at 0. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3/5. So all this portion right here would represent 3/5. For exercise 4, I want you to shade these figures based on the numbers given on the right hand side. Now again, it doesn't really matter where you start the shade. You can start here, 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 but realize that my answer may be different by which one is not shaded or what's been shaded. But I want you to give it a try right now. For 1/4 or 1/4, so let's shade in the first part right there. Again, you don't have to be in one of these, but that pretty much represents 1/4. Here I want 2 out of the 3/3. So it's going to be something that looks, let's say like that. Over here, I want 5 out of the 6 parts of this hexagon. So here is a good way of representing that. Again, you can have this white triangle to be any one of these. That's a good representation. And for this one here, I want 3 out of the 10. Now you can shade any 3, but let's just be consistent, start over here, and this would represent the shading of 3 out of 10, 3/10. Let's look at our last two. I want 3 out of the 4 ice cream cones shaded, and over here I like 6 out of the 7, 6/7. So I want you to try first, and I want it to be kind of colorful for this one, okay? For this first one here, 3/4 or 3/4 would look like something like this. 3/4. Over here, we're going to have 1, 2, 3. I like that color. Okay, very colorful hot pink right there. And this represents 6/7. Now on page 9 of your notes, there's an optional exercise 5 where I just want to give you some practice on actually just drawing circular fractions. Now I start with the actual figure, like a half or a third. Then the first circle in the image has one with just the center dot, and then you have a couple others for you to practice with no center dot. You have to kind of eyeball it. Again, we're not talking about super scientific precision here, okay? We want to just kind of approximate, get some practice in drawing these fractions. And again, we have these here as a guide to help us. And I'm going to try to give you some pointers on this also. For example, half is the easiest, right? You just kind of eyeball it. And of course, you don't have to draw a vertical line. It could be horizontal again. I'm not going to use a ruler, just slap it in there. For a third, it's probably a good idea to try eyeball the center first. So I'm going to maybe like around right there, maybe. And I'm going to start with a line over here to my center. And again, I want to do something that looks sort of like this. Again, use your picture that's on your paper as a guide. You can either follow through with the video or pause it at your leisure. I will put the little logo on the bottom. So approximately a third, maybe like something like this and like that. And again, this is not super precise, but it just gives you an idea of how to do this. Now for a quarter is really half of a half. So the first thing you do is just slice this in half. So it's kind of like slice it like that, and then kind of just slice it this way. So if you want to put the center someplace approximately right there as a guide, and then just go right through there. And there's your quarters. Let's do the others. To draw something that's in fifths, that's a little bit tougher. One thing that can help you is maybe try to imagine or picture a star like that. So you notice how it's kind of divided, the angles here. And that will help you to draw kind of a similar figure to that over here. So I'm going to start with a center point right there. And I'm going to draw maybe one like that. And it kind of looks like that. So I'm going to kind of like that, see? And then there's that angle, so something like that. And then something down right there. And then last one's kind of up over here. And again, you can fudge these a bit, erase, move them a bit. Again, they're not exactly the same size because I'm just doing this by hand. One thing you can do to help you draw more precise slices, especially 5, is get yourself some kind of stencil, like this. It's divided into things like squares and pentagons, hexagons, octagons. And what you can do is look for the circle that's on here. There's a circle here, and then superimpose it with, let's say, a pentagon. And that will give, but don't draw the full pentagon, just like the little corners, and then use that as a guide, as a mark. Now this one I got from a place called Austin Publishing in Australia, and it's the best in the world, in my opinion. There's nothing that comes close to this thing. If you can't find this particular brand, again, its website's right down there, you can get others from other educational sources, which are listed on my website. Now let's continue with some of the others. Now for 6 slices, first, cut up your circle into 3 slices, into thirds. And we've done that. It's actually not so hard to do. So I'll draw my little center here, and I'm going to draw a line here, and then kind of eyeball the thirds, like something like that. So that's not so bad. Here's my thirds. Now, for the 6, you cut each one of these in half. So you kind of eyeball this thing. Well, the halfway marks are around right there. Just try maybe, or just make this line straight, or somewhat straight. You know, I'm purposely not using a ruler. And then you can do the same thing for the others. Kind of find the halfway mark here, but then kind of make sure it's kind of straight with this line right here. And same thing for this one. You just go straight down. And again, it's not exact, but it gives you an idea. With practice, it's hard for me to do on a larger board than on paper, but it gives you a very good idea. And again, if you're using one of these stencils, use the hexagon. 7 slices is kind of tough. What you can do is, of course, start with the center. Draw your line straight down. Now, half of 7 is 3.5. So you want to kind of draw 3.5 slices in just the first half. Okay, so you don't want to quite, I'm going to erase that in a second. I don't want to quite reach that. So I'm going to do something like, 1, 2, 3. That almost looks like 4, so I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. So like 1, 2, 3. That looks better. So sometimes you have to adjust these things. So something like that. And you go 1, 2, 3, and then kind of make a mirror image over here. So it's going to be like that. And then you can erase that right there. And there's your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 slices. Eighths are one of the easiest things to do. Let's start off with our center right here. And I'm going to cut my circle in half. Then let's create quarters like that. And then each quarter I'm going to cut in half again. So kind of like eyeball this thing. Well, it's around right there and maybe like around right there. And I want to go to the center. And then do the same thing for the missing part. So around halfway marks there, the halfway marks down right there. I want to go to the center. So then I just draw my line that goes right through. And there you go. We got ourselves the slices for a pizza. Let's try 9. For 9, it's very easy. Start at the center. And what we're going to do is do our thirds, which we're fairly comfortable, at least I am. So like with thirds, now cut each third into 3 parts, thirds of a third. So kind of look at this line, this arc right here, and kind of like eyeball it. Thirds right there, and the same thing here, thirds, and then thirds right there, and then just connect them to the center. So you get something that looks like that. And there you have your 9ths right there. For 10, first break this thing up into 5 parts. So we'll do our division in 5s. So you can kind of imagine the star. Something like that maybe. And let's connect this together. There's a star right there. 5 parts. And then we cut each one of these in half. And again, if you also want to use it as a guide, this line used to go straight across here. Go straight across here like that. Straight across down. And then something like that. And something like that. Or just visualize how to cut this in half like that. See? And there are your 10 parts right there. For 11, I'm not going to do 11. It's very difficult, and it's very rare, if ever, you'll ever see something like that on a test. But 12 is pretty typical. And there's actually a couple of ways to do 12. Actually, let me show you both of them. One train of thought is, well, I'm going to divide my circle in 3s and thirds. So, and again, we're pretty comfy in doing this. And so it's something like this first. Okay, you have your thirds. And then what? Well, then cut your thirds in half. See, something like that. And cut that in half right there. Cut that in half right there. And what do we have? We have slices of 6, but now cut each one of these slices in half to get your 12s. Something like that. Cut in half, and so on. Now another way of seeing this is, well, let's cut this in quarters first. So cut it in half, and then cut it in half this way. And then each one of the quarters we divide into 3 parts. So again, look at the arc and kind of eyeball that around right there. Notice how I do little tick marks first as a guide, and then I draw my line to the center. So then I draw something like that, and then keep doing that for the others. Thirds, thirds, and then just draw your lines. So each one of these is divided into 12 parts. One more. How about sixteenths? Well, we just keep cutting things in half. So we start with a half, and then we're going to go quarters, and then how about the halfway mark, those, and then we're going to do eighths. And then cut each of the eighths in half to get the sixteenths. So I'll draw my little guides right here first, and then cut them in half. And that's all there is to it. And again, I really want to stress that. Take the time to practice these problems so you know how to draw them. Because you never know on a test, you might have to draw some of these, and you want to do a really good job because, hey, you're my student now, right? Yeah.